and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. It's Monday night at 9. Time for Sex Talk with Dr. Richard Siegel, a certified sex therapist and sexuality educator. Dr. Siegel is here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality that you might not have known who to ask. He'll also welcome special guests to talk about a wide variety of topics within the fascinating world of sexuality. So, welcome to Sex Talk.
Good evening and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers.
Yes,
Welcome
indeed.
to my brother, Larry Siegel.
Glad to be here as always. And welcome you, my brother.
Thank you very much. I'm Ricky Siegel, certified sex therapist, sexuality educator, clinical sexologist, as is Larry, certified sexuality educator,
Yes, indeed.
author, and sex dude. We are here every Monday night. Thank you for joining us, live streaming on Facebook, or if you're local on the radio, we're at WNN on 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Feel free to call in. Well, you won't be able to call in tonight. We have a guest. We're really excited to welcome our guest, Galen Faust. I'll tell you about him in a minute. But you can go on the Facebook page, Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers, and hit that little send email button, and we will see it. Please feel free. Call in, ask us questions, join the conversation.
And if you really want the opportunity to do that, tonight's a good night because after tonight, we're going to be off for a couple of weeks for the holidays.
Indeed. This will be our last show of 2017. So we should...
Seems weird to say.
I know. We should thank our audience before, in case we forget later. Thanks for those of you who've been supporting us in the past few months.
Really, really appreciate it.
Trying to grow this thing and hopefully get some sponsorship and keep everyone talking about sex. And it seems the sort of accidental theme of our whole thing here is that all of these critical issues that get in the way of sexual health and good sexual relationships and pleasure end up being men's issues. Or what should be men's issues.
Well, I think, all roads end up at this place when we look at where a lot of the problems we have are and where a lot of the sources of these issues really, really stem from.
I mean, we are kind of odd, I guess, two dudes working in this field for, we were talking about this the other day, kind of mind-blowing, combined 50 years plus between the two of us, in a field that, especially over the past 25, 30 years, or 25, 30 years ago, was really kind of a feminized field. Sexuality education naturally came out of Planned Parenthood primarily, and it was women's health issues.
That's right.
And you'd say sexual and reproductive health issues, and guys would roll their eyes and go, women's stuff.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. The whole concept of contraception, of birth control was always sort of a woman's
Well,
responsibility.
you're the one that get pregnant. I'm just here for the fun part.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So 25 years later, here we are in this mess, this unprecedented time of sexual harassment awareness. Maybe as we've been hoping, take another cataclysm, another catastrophe for another sexual revolution, this time one based in sexual health.
Right, and that's been something we've been advocating for. That's the kind of new revolution that we need.
Right. So, in the news this week, let's spin our wheel of outrage and see what's set our head on fire this week. There's been this new list. Our engineer buddy freaks out with our potty mouth sometime, and has to really.
But we'll be
keep
good
us,
tonight,
right? But now there's a new list. Right now, there's new 7 dirty words you can't say.
Right. And just
according
before we go on, for a lot of people that may either barely remember or not know at all, the late, great comedian / social philosopher George Carlin, in the late 1960s,
Who doesn't know
came
that?
up with an iconic list of 7 dirty words that you cannot say on television.
I'll list them for you. No. But right now, according to the latest from the Trump administration and Health and Human Services, and it used to be bad in the George W. Bush administration when words like abortion and condom would be censored from the health department websites.
Exactly. And under Reagan, with the term homosexual or homosexuality had to be removed, especially from anything related to sexual and reproductive
Because
health.
we don't have those people in our
Right.
administration.
I remember, too, in an 8-year presidency, it was not till the end of his 6th year that he even uttered the word AIDS. And this
Wasn't
was a
it-
president in the height, in the
Right.
beginning of this crisis.
Wasn't it 1985 the first time he uttered the word?
86.
86.
The end of 86.
Right?
Yeah.
That was a crime.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about sweeping
Right.
things under the rug.
And it had to be taken out of anything that went by him. Right?
So-
So the 7 dirty words that George Carlin came up with have now been dethroned,
Yeah, I guess. That's,
at least politically.
Those are a lot more fun, right? But
Well, they are
now
better
we're
words.
looking at what are they? Fetus.
Right? That's
You can't
one.
say,
Can't say that in
in
any
any-
government writing now.
Diversity.
Diversity.
Oh my God! Really?
Right.
You can't.
Well-
We're talking about funding streams and health and human services. You can't say diversity. You can't say vulnerable.
You can't say
populations.
science-based or
Oh,
evidence-based. Those are
that's-
2 separate ones.
That's going to make the wheel of outrage spin off its axle.
Well, especially if I can just throw in the other piece on that too. You can't say science-based, but they defend that, saying
Yeah.
that they're still based in science, only science in the context of cultural
Right.
values.
In consideration
What does
of
that mean?
community standards. That means
That's alternate facts.
That means if it disagrees with what we hear on
Right.
Sunday morning, we're going to just choose to ignore it
Right.
because you jarhead, nerdy scientists can go take your science and don't
Right.
confuse,
We don't need
right?
your science. We
This
have
is-
our belief.
This is why Stephen Colbert invented the word truthiness.
What a great,
Right.
great contributor to the
Actually
lexicon.
added to the English language with that brilliant word to
Yep.
talk about things that just feel true enough.
That's
that
right.
We don't need to be
They don't have to be
confused
true. They just
with
need to
fact.
feel true.
That's right.
So the other words that we had on there, I think we've got one more.
Sensitive, diversity, and vulnerable,
Vulnerable.
transgender.
Transgender, right?
Right.
That you're not
Let's
allowed-
just-
that's
let's just
gone.
pretend now that all the transgender and gay people have gone away. We don't have to worry about that, right? The Republicans are in charge. We can all relax. What is this insanity?
Actually, I can put a little hope in that one. Because maybe that would sort of portend this move toward we don't have to think about bathrooms anymore. We just have
Right.
people
Well,
using bathrooms.
right.
Wouldn't
I
that be
think,
nice?
yes, while there was a lot of celebration about the election in Alabama, as we pointed out before, it's hard to be too excited over the fact that we just barely, by a single percentage point, didn't send an alleged pedophile, creeper, predator, bigot, racist, a confessed bigot, homophobe, racist, slavery advocate to the Senate.
Right.
But the last election in Virginia, that's a victory.
Sure.
When the first open out transgender politician beats the guy who was
Right.
pushing for the transgender bathroom bill, that's justice. That's divine karmic justice and a true sign of,
Yes.
of hope. So, yeah. We're
And then
hoping-
the last word that is not allowed to say, entitlement.
entitlement. And that's kind of funny because that'll segue us into our topic for this evening because, of course, we know what they're talking about.
Right.
You can't mention entitlement programs and welfare, public welfare, and we know it's only a matter of time before they start sniffing around for the money they're giving to billionaires in Medicaid and Medicare, right? That kind of entitlement. But in our context of all this madness going on with sexual harassment and poor sexual health being exhibited by men, entitlement takes on kind of a different meaning.
It does. And I want to kind of go back to a point that I've made previously and differentiate between entitlement and privilege. I am going to keep taking issue with this concept of male privilege because, again, I'm looking at it from the standpoint that privilege comes with some sort of appreciation, some sort of acknowledgement of the special rights and privilege that somebody has. We're talking about flat-out entitlement. It's just a sense
an
that it's
attitude.
owed to them.
Yeah.
That they deserve it by virtue of their gender. I am a man, therefore, this is what I'm entitled to. And that's the problem.
What's so ironic about that hyper machismo is that it's so ridiculously immature and childish.
Right. Which, great segue
Yeah,
into
let's-
moving
let's-
toward
Our guest should
introducing
be
our
calling
guest.
in the next minute or two.
I believe he's actually here.
We're good, right? Okay. This is exciting for us because this is like, that expression, friends you haven't met yet. This is a gentleman named Galen Faust, who we've just met through an awesome Facebook group that we're all part of, that we have to keep secret because it's just too awesome that it'll get ruined if too many people find out about it. But you know who you are, you collective deviants out there who are part of that wonderful group.
And let me read the post that really first got our attention. I mean, we've always sort of recognized him and sort of been part of it, but this really, I think, is what helped the connection get established.
This is what made us say we got to get this guy on our show.
Right. Our culture does not provide adolescent boys a contemporary process of initiation into mature masculinity. This leaves masculinity stuck in its adolescent manifestation to one degree or another throughout adulthood. Our educational system offers no responsible sex-positive sex ed, diversity training, negotiation skills, and no discussions of sexual consent and responsibility, not to mention anything about the ecstatic mutual pleasure and intimacy sex offers. Instead, this critical stage of development takes place on the playground and hyper-masculine athletics culture, or worse, street gangs. Here, the dark violence of the uninitiated masculine reigns. This perpetuates a class of men capable of rape, sexual assault, domestic violence, and other tragic manifestations of the uninitiated masculine. If you are such a man, find an initiated mentor or elder to guide you back to a mature, empowered, responsible masculinity. And there's that last line that just made me jump up out of my chair.
Yeah, how deep is that? That's awesome. We've been looking forward to getting the chance to talk to Galen, and especially as this fits into our ongoing theme of what is it about men and these behaviors. I mean, first of all, every week we worry about, is this topic going to dry up or move past? It just keeps whipping up.
It's an endless font.
Folks are dropping like flies. There was a list of 10 major Hollywood projects that were killed as a result of all of these scandals. And the worst one, there was one on the list that was dropped because it was a Weinstein Company project. So Amazon picked it up to resuscitate it, and then the guy at Amazon was fingered and fired. So the project was killed twice.
Right. And how about today? We hear that a long-time federal circuit court judge is resigning over the same things.
So this, again, hyper-masculinity, but complete, utter lack of maturity and responsibility.
Yeah, and I think those are the pivotal points.
Right? How many times? It's so head-scratching, baffling. Sorry to keep asking, but what guys think whipping out their junk isn't a positive, attractive, is going to get a good response, that women enjoy that and want to see that? How twisted does that sense of power and entitlement get? That guys think, oh, yeah, this, right?
Right. What are they thinking? All right. So let's see if we can bring our guest on. And let's go live if we can.
Galen, are you on the line with us?
I'm here.
Hey, Galen, how are you?
Oh, okay, we're on. We're connected. Doing great. I've been really enjoying
there you
listening to this intro, this beginning of the conversation, and all that's been said. All very important things. You guys are really on top of the situation, I hear.
Well, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I didn't know you've been sitting there waiting. We're really honored to have you on the show.
Cruise along with how you are introducing this topic. So I'm grateful and happy to be here with you and your audience.
So, well, thanks.
Welcome
thanks.
Indeed.
Yes,
I also want to hold up this, at least the picture. I don't have a copy, I'm sad to say, but your book, Decoding Your Kink. I want our audience to be able to see that. And I hope we'll get a chance to plug that for you. Do you want to start with that, or you want to start with that
say
awesome,
a few words about that
awesome quote that we just read from you?
I was kind of relieved personally that Kink didn't make that list of bands recently. So I'm still flying under the radar, I guess, or the Kink community as a whole, which is a burgeoning community of millions of people. It's a totally a wave of sexuality is occurring now that we're not really ready for as a culture, institutionally and such, which swings me into this topic of all these, men, this fall from grace. I mean, this is a classic, like a Greek story playing out over and over and over, this fall from grace and leading to ruin. And then there's going to be those who come back with a redemption story and how they were saved and their wife is standing by them and all those kinds of things.
Right.
We love a good redemption story, don't we?
But that's just the tip of the iceberg, the celebrity level where we are seeing it. And if you uncovered the whole thing, it's a powder keg, which is like it's on fire right now, and it's probably more unfortunate revelations to come. I'm sure there's kind of no end to this.
Oh yeah.
But the reason I believe the problem is there is because of what I call sexual dishonesty. We have a fear in our culture that many people are terrorized of letting someone else know the frequency or the nature or what their fantasy really looks like.
Right.
So they're keep it hidden, which puts it in shadow. It's as strong as ever, and when it's in shadow, that's when it leaks out in all these tragic, unhealthy, risky, violating kind of ways.
Exactly.
I think there are the predators or the sociopaths. There's some end of the spectrum. Okay, what I'm talking about really isn't going to fit that end, but I think that end is very narrow compared to the full spectrum of men that are out there. And I think, and both men and women are afraid of this same fear. I call it sexual authenticity disorder.
Nice.
Sexual authenticity disorder.
Discovering the true nature of your authentic sexuality.
Nice. I like that.
So this is a problem that comes from we don't have sex education. We don't teach the things you mentioned in the comment from the meme I put out there. I think a lot of the issue could be solved if we simply had some adult level sex education for our adolescents as they're growing up, and just showing more maturity to them about how to be responsible adults. Because I used to 7 years I mentored teen boys through ritual rite of passage weekends that I was in, and these boys came from all kinds of horrible situations and backgrounds. But when you got down to it and you met them in a healthy masculine way, you're just not pushing them some way, you're just letting them open up. They're beautiful. These kids weren't predators, weren't criminal. They touched those edges and their life was heading in that way. But when they got to this place where they could just be honest about what's hurting them and, what the circumstances is, So this idea of toxic masculinity, I think it's more about immature masculinity. These people are not toxic. They are not, so there's, again, some men, they are criminal. They are on that. But I think most people are not having a fair outlet for their sexuality in our sex-negative culture. So people sneak and hide and try to get away with stuff and then get busted.
Absolutely. And, if I can, there's a quote that often fall back on as well from the great, one of our great sex therapists in California, Marty Klein, who basically talks about how we're intimidated by our own sexuality. I mean, sexuality in general is intimidating. And if I am scared of or intimidated by my own sexuality, then yours is terrifying to me. Right? It's that much more frightening. So when we look at a lot of these, this behavior, especially from men, I have to wonder how much of this behavior, as almost seemingly natural as it is really about compensating for that insecurity, that immaturity in their own sense of their own masculinity.
Yeah.
Well, they don't know how to communicate honestly about their sexuality. They don't have to say. They aren't able to say what they want. What it really looks like, how often they would like it. I mean, this should all be going on in the beginning of a relationship.
Sure, of
Before
course.
you get into a relationship, have this discussion. Otherwise, you wind up in an erotic mismatch often. Then one person's sexuality is so different than the others that it often there's no space accommodated for it in in the relationship. So the people still sneak and hide and try to get away with it, which is a terrible thing to do. But sexuality is that powerful that it's not going to go away, even if you say, okay, you don't like that, all right, I won't do it.
Well, sure.
That's not going to really work for most people.
Every sex therapist deals with couples that come in where after the big bust, right? And it's typically it's a heterosexist script where it's a wife who busts the husband either looking at a particular kind of porn or exploring a particular kind of kink fantasy. And of course, the big explosion, he's a pervert, he's a sex addict, he's a deviant, and the big panic. And very often, he's dragged into therapy by the ear, like this angry, scolding mom catching the humiliated adolescent, holding him his stuff, and fix him, and maybe I won't leave him. Right, so of course we have, if someone has a fantasy that they think their partner would be angry or disgusted by, why would they share it? Or more importantly, how would they share it? So could you maybe spend a couple minutes dovetailing your interest in kink and how more vanilla sex therapists and folks could benefit from, bringing that into a therapeutic kind of world to help couples be more authentic, as you say, sexually honest with one another.
Yeah, that's probably the most difficult territory there can be for a therapist
Sure.
to try to support this, not basically a negotiation. What I look at it is a
definitely.
negotiation. It should be, so where I start with is, in that case you just described with the man, so let's talk about what's your baseline sexuality? Like if you weren't under any restrictions, how often would you masturbate, or how often would you want to have sex? And what is the kind of sex that you would really like? So let's first find what your normal is, and let's honor that,
Right.
See, most of these equations, we're not allowing any honoring. So what is your real sexuality, sir? And letting him have a sexuality versus you are now under restriction and censored and
in the doghouse.
And so there's no respect. To me, that's totally disrespectful of the man in this case, their authentic sexuality. So I try to start with, for both of them, well, what is your normal? Because they haven't even discussed that themselves often.
Right.
I push to have that, if they're not willing to allow that both have a sexuality and it's a part of them and therefore a part of their relationship, and somehow we need to make this work together, they're going to have a very difficult time. And in some cases, it might lead to, well, hey, we are in a divide here that's not bridgeable.
Right.
But I think most people, even if you have a loving connection with your partner, there should be ways that you can communicate and negotiate and work something out that even if the person with the desire says, okay, I get it, that's a boundary for you, you would not go there, I'm going to choose, even though this is true for me, because I want to be in this relationship, to, back down. Okay, but at least that came from a place of, okay, I'm making a choice.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's the negotiation.
I have an ultimatum.
Exactly. And I think that's where I think a lot of the vanilla world, if you will, can take a lesson from the kink world, because the level of communication and negotiation and let's make a deal that's involved in healthy kink relationships, we just see completely absent in the rest of the world.
Yeah, and I think especially when it gets dragged into a clinical setting and pathologized, made into a disease, then it becomes an argument instead of a negotiation. And there's very little room for that maturity that Galen's talking about. Right? That instead of this adamance, this insistence, lovers forget that they're lovers and get into these parent-child dynamics, and they wonder why they, stop having sex, no less want to explore or heaven forbid, bring a little spice into their relationship.
Well, if you say, a lot, we are wired to not be sexually attracted to mommy or daddy.
Yeah, and if your partner's acting like a grousing, nagging parent, your libido's going to split. Right?
Exactly.
So it's getting to be about that time.
Well, I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, I would just say, or it's going to go somewhere else. If you're
right,
there
exactly.
you go.
Meeting,
it'll find an outlet.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And rather than, again, having these mature adult conversations about sex, we'll just blame the fantasy or blame the porn or call it a sickness and get all moral and high and mighty. So would you please share, Mr. Faust, dear man, your wish list for everybody's sexy New Year's resolutions? What would you like America to embrace in 2018?
Yeah. 2018 should be the year of sexual honesty. People let's bring it to the surface now. It's a natural part of our personalities. It shouldn't be the bastard of our personality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well said.
Along with intellect, creativity, spirit, and emotion, which we've drilled into and explored and expanded. Sex, we turn the lights out. We turn our gaze away.
Right.
It's time to bring it into the light.
Absolutely.
And allow it to flourish as this beautiful, ecstatic, empowering part of our life experience.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Excellent.
And I have to congratulate Larry. You got a nice article on health.com. And I understand you have a few sexy resolutions of your own.
That was kind of
run out of time.
that was what the article on health.com was really about. What can we do for the new year? Again, I'm not a real big resolutions person, but here are some things I think that people can think about.
It's easy to suggest other people to do,
right? Exactly.
We don't
That's
have
right.
to.
That's my resolution, to have other people do
We're
resolutions.
professionals.
One of the things that, let's wake up every morning and remind our partner why we want to be with them. Right? Say something, let them know that we appreciate it. If you wake up every day.
Little gestures.
Little things, even
Remind
just
them
little
that you're
words. If we
lovers.
wake up every day feeling and hearing that we're appreciated by our lover, that can make such a huge difference. People often therapists often talk about having a date night. Well, let's take that a step further. Let's, not just commit to spending more time with each other, but let's commit to, first of all, having more sex, but having more mindful, more meaningful sex. I think...
and no perfunctory, obligatory sex
well,
ever.
that's what it seems
resolution,
to. That's what it seems to be. Okay,
Break
it's our Wednesday
routines.
night. It's our sex night.
Yeah.
It does become kind of routine. So let's give it a little bit more meaning. Let's give it a little bit more intentionality, particularly with this idea that this is the person we want to be with. Right? There's so many things. I think making a commitment to experiment. Here's where I think the kink world is there for everybody, whether it is trying something kinky, whether it's opening the relationship, where it's just a new position. Make a point of trying something new. Right?
There you go. And thank you to our guest, Galen Faust.
Thank you, Galen. So glad you
author
were
of
able to join us.
Decoding Your Kink. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas,
Yes.
Happy Hanukkah to all our listeners. Thank you all.
And safe and
See you next
healthy
year,
and
right
happy.
here, Monday nights at 9 o'clock, starting in a couple weeks after the holidays.
Right. And everybody needs to have great sex.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with Dr. Richard Siegel. Join us every Monday night at 9 on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.